So, whatever happened, in my opinion, to probably the single greatest classic monster movie of all time, the original 1933 King Kong? Let's find out. Movies, music, and monsters. Danger, danger. Hey my friends, DanMonroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Oh boy, King Kong. I know I start a lot of these videos talking about the first time I ever saw one of these great classic movies, but today is a little bit different, as my story is all about how I didn't get to see this film back in the day. For all you young people out there, there was once a time, a long time ago, when every single thing that you wanted wasn't immediately available. There was no instant gratification when it came to movies and music. You had to wait, sometimes a really long time, which to me actually makes those events, when they do eventually happen, way more special. But what can I say? I'm old. Anyway, my earliest memories of this film were not watching it, but rather listening to it. My dad was one of those early audiophile guys who would record movies onto reel-to-reel tape, and then it was so freaking awesome to have your friends come home from school with you on the bus, sit down and listen to Pinocchio, listen to Star Wars, and yes, listen to King Kong. I knew every single line of dialogue, every musical cue, and every sound effect in this movie by heart at the age of 7, patiently waiting for my opportunity to actually get to see this film for myself. And then, one fateful day in probably the mid-1970s, while flipping through the latest weekly issue of TV Guide, I was thrilled beyond belief to see that King Kong was going to be shown this week on the Friday night movie at 11:30, way past my bedtime, I was sorry to say, but begged my father to please let me stay up late just this once so I can watch the giant gorilla fall off the Empire State Building. Well, the answer was yes, but only if I went to bed at my normal time of 9 p.m. Then he would wake me up at 11:30 to watch the film. Great! No problem, it's a deal. So I crawled in bed that night with visions of screaming blonde women and oversized monkeys dancing in my head until I finally woke up at 2:30 in the morning. Horrified, I ran to the television and turned it on, only to find that the station had gone off the air for the night. I missed my one freaking opportunity, to which my father simply replied, sorry, I fell asleep.
Truly unfortunate, but father knows best. Still, a real crushing blow for an impressionable child.
Face it, Danny, you really did and still do need your beauty sleep. You might consider taking a nap now. Couldn't hurt.
Quick, pull his power pack out before he says anything else.
You mock my pain, and after I just restored you. Anyway, it was probably another year after that I finally did get to see the film, which certainly did not disappoint as I sat there wide-eyed taking it all in. The glorious black and white, the amazing stop-motion special effects with real live honest-to-goodness monsters chomping on helpless sailors and native villagers. So, grab your favorite screaming blonde woman and a case of gas bombs with a bucket of stale popcorn, and let's dive in. Wait a minute. Hold everything. Now what? I seem to remember you covering this topic over a year ago. What is this? Double dipping into the monster pool? Well, yes and no. I did a video way back when this channel was just beginning about what specifically happened to the original Kong stop-motion puppets, but not really on the entire film itself, so no, it's not the same thing.
It's an interesting watch. You certainly hadn't found your groove yet. And then there was the overly long hair. Was Rogaine your sponsor back then?
I hate to agree with Blobby, but honestly, not sure what you were thinking. The audience found it quite off-putting. Yeah, and if I recall, in the comments, everybody thought I was wearing a wig. But anyway, if anybody wants to check that video out, all about the history and fate of the original stop-motion Kong miniatures, the link is in the description. But in the meantime, to fully understand the origins of this classic monster movie, we gotta go back, way back to the 1920s, when Kong co-director Ernest B. Schoedsack began filming monkeys of his own while directing Chang, a drama of the wilderness, in 1927, also with documentary filmmaker Marion C. Cooper, and Rango in 1931, both of which heavily featured monkeys in genuine jungle settings. Then, in 1930, Congo Pictures released I guess you'd call it a hoax documentary called Ingaji. Super strange little film about native people getting it on with gorillas and having the offspring that looked more ape than human. Yeah, I know it's weird, but believe it or not, the film was an enormous hit and actually brought in over $4 million, making it one of the highest grossing films of the 1930s. And even though Marion C. Cooper never publicly admitted that this was any way of an inspiration for Kong, it's pretty well known that RKO Pictures eventually greenlit King Kong because this highly controversial movie was such an enormous moneymaker for the studio. Okay, that's just plain weird. Right? Anyway, ever since 1929, Marion Cooper wanted to create a film about gorillas, and after joining RKO in 1931, Cooper made the super cool decision to incorporate the whole Beauty and the Beast element into the plot. And lo, the Beast looked upon the face of Beauty, and from that day it was as one dead.
One look at your face and it's completely as one dead. Maybe two.
Now, even though RKO was at some serious risk for going bankrupt due to, the Great Depression, stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien, hearing that Cooper wanted to make a monkey film, pitched the concept of a large gorilla carrying around a screaming blonde woman, and a test reel was requested, which was then approved by David Selznick, specifically the scenes where Kong fights the Tyrannosaurus Rex, as well as the scene with Kong shaking the guys off the log. Super interesting to think that these sequences weren't actually shot for the production of the film at all, but rather just for a test reel to see if there was any interest in picking up the film by the studio, even though obviously both of these scenes did end up in the final picture. So, with Kong green lit and on its way, Cooper began hiring actors and building sets for Kong, utilizing the jungle set that already existed from the film The Most Dangerous Game, with Cooper himself directing the live-action sequences until his co-director, Schoedsack, was done filming The Most Dangerous Game. The brilliant Marcel Delgado developed not only the two different Kong miniatures, but also the giant Kong head and even some of the stop-motion people. Wait a minute, what do you mean two different King Kongs? Well, yeah, there were two different Kong miniatures built, both the same size, but with slightly different characteristics. The first Kong, lovingly known as Long Face, because his face looked kind of long, which was the first Kong created and used for the scenes in the test reel. Then, after the film was greenlit by RKO, a second Kong miniature known as Round Face was built so that essentially two different teams of animators could work on multiple shots at the same time. Again, take a look at the video I did about a year ago specifically about the Kong miniatures. Tons of super cool information. Link in the description. Now, as strange as it sounds, filming actually began before they even had a completed screenplay. Cooper hired British crime and adventure writer Edgar Wallace to write the screenplay, which I believe he started around December 1931, this draft being really bizarre with topics of, shall we say, romantic assaults between the ape and the girl, as well as a whole bunch of racial tensions between the characters, which were all then later completely removed, and in a way I can only say thank goodness for that. Sad. Edgar Wallace finished his rough draft in January 1932 and then died a month later, and even though a lot of his ideas were cut, some things remained in the film, like Kong removing Anne's clothes, along with some rough outlines of all the New York City scenes, which were very similar to the way they ended up in the final version of the movie. Fun fact, the creators of Kong took so much inspiration from earlier films like Dracula and Frankenstein that the RKO executives were honestly worried about copyright violation, so much so that the studio purchased the copyright to Arthur Conan Doyle's novel, The Lost World. The special effects in this film were not only groundbreaking for the day, but also, in my opinion, still some of the best we've ever seen, consisting of stop-motion animation, matte paintings, rear projection miniatures, so many wonderful monsters brought to life by the brilliant animation skills of Willis O'Brien. All the really cool jungle scenery was created by layering several different glass paintings within a single shot to create an awesome depth of field. The most difficult of the effects for the crew were actually the scenes where they had to incorporate the live-action footage with the separately filmed stop-motion animation, but was cleverly achieved by exposing only part of the frame on the first pass, and then running the same piece of film back through the camera again, exposing the other part of the frame with a completely different image, with the most complex shots being achieved with both matte and traveling matte techniques. We also got a ton of what was known as rear projection, where the actors would act in front of a big screen with footage being projected from the back, then a film camera shooting from the front, combining both the actors and the rear projection plate. And this was the very first time that RKO ever used this special effect technique. Fun fact, the two guys that literally brought the film to life, Cooper and Schoedsack, were the two main pilots in one of the biplanes that actually took out Kong at the end of the film. I guess they figured, we brought him in, we'll take him out. Hey guys, real quick, according to my YouTube analytics, surprisingly, more than half of the people watching this channel are not subscribed. So, if you could do me a huge favor, please hit the subscribe button. It only takes a second, but really helps this channel grow. Thank you, my friends. You're the best. Really interesting, there's one specific shot of Carl Denham getting caught on a branch while running through the jungle and then turning around and looking backwards at something. I could never figure out what the heck he was looking at until I realized that there was supposed to be another dinosaur coming from the other direction to force everyone onto the log, being trapped on both sides, as you can see here in this amazing production photo. Obviously, that footage never made it into the film, but the shot of Carl Denham looking backwards is still there, and I think that's really super cool. Now, besides the two Kong animation miniatures, there was also a third Kong. Well, basically just an enormous head that was used in sequences, the jungle scene where Kong first sees Anne, the close-up shots in the jungle village of Kong chomping on the natives, and of course, back in New York on stage just before Kong breaks out and wreaks havoc on the entire city. Kong chomping on the natives? I certainly don't remember seeing that back in the day.
Imagine how big the Alka-Seltzer tablets had to be.
Well, when Kong was released in 1933, the film contained all the shots of Kong eating the natives, but when it was re-released, I think in 1938, I assume due to the censors, all this stuff was cut out. They just thought it was a little too much. The shots of Kong munching all the villagers, as well as other shots of Kong's giant foot squishing the villagers into squishy jungle pancakes. Squishy jungle pancakes. 3 words I never thought any human would ever string together in one sentence. I'm out. But in 1969, a 16mm print was found in Philadelphia, which included the censored footage, so that's why these scenes are now included in most of the current releases, even though you can clearly see a bit of quality shift whenever we go from the regular film to any of these cut sequences. I always remember as a kid being super fascinated by Kong's fur, the way it would move and bristle in the wind on top of the Empire State Building, until later on I just realized that the bristling fur was simply the effect of the animators constantly touching the rabbit fur on the model, giving the illusion of movement when played back at 24 frames per second. Obviously not King Kong himself, but most of the other dinosaur stop-motion puppets were previously created for Willis O'Brien's film creation. A couple of really interesting bloopers that were left in the film. The first being when Kong flips the T-Rex over in the jungle fight. You can see the support beams that hold up the animation model. Really amazing, and also a second glitch, even though I'm pretty sure there's many that I missed, where the surface gauge was left in the shot for one single frame in Kong's lair at the top of Skull Island. Here's a shot of it from an earlier release, but I'm pretty sure that this frame has unfortunately been removed from all the current releases. I checked my latest Blu-ray copy frame by frame, and it's just not there. Too bad. A fun little piece of Hollywood history lost forever. Production on King Kong was finally completed in January 1933, with production costs adding up to almost $700,000, a whole heck of a lot of cash back in the early 1930s, I can tell you that. Now, I know I've said this before, but I have to say it again. This is one of those films where the musical score was just so important and influential that I just don't think it would have been the same movie without it. Written and composed by the incredible Max Steiner, completing the entire score in like only 8 short weeks, then recorded with an orchestra comprised of only 46 members, with Marion C. Cooper paying $50,000 out of his own money just to pay for the orchestra. And I always found it really interesting that sometimes not using music in any particular scene can be almost as effective as using it. Perfect example is the fight between Kong and the T-Rex, making it the only Skull Island scene that contains absolutely no music. Super cool fun fact, the enormous Skull Island wall set was not only reused in the film She in 1935, but was also unfortunately burned to the ground in the final shot of the burning of Atlanta in Gone with the Wind. Yes, my friends, that's the giant Kong wall disintegrating right in front of our eyes. Fun fact, Kong's roar was actually created by mixing the sounds of lions and tigers slowed down and then playing them back in reverse. King Kong premiered at Radio City Music Hall and RKO Roxy on March 2nd, 1933, with the Hollywood premiere taking place on March 24th at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and was an immediate box office success, bringing in over $90,000 on its opening weekend alone, bringing in about $650,000 during its first run, and before the 1952 re-release, this film was reported to have a worldwide total of almost $3 million. And yes, the infamous Lost Spider pit sequence was actually filmed, but after the sequence was cut prior to the original 1933 release, due to the fact that some people in the preview audience literally got up and left because the scene was just so gruesome, and today it's just gone. Lost, except for only a few still photos and pre-production drawings. King Kong was first seen on television in March of 1956. Numerous different VHS and Laserdisc releases of varying quality were released over the years. Kong was one of the very first films to be released on Laserdisc as part of the Criterion Collection. There was a digital restoration DVD in 2005, coinciding with the theatrical release of Peter Jackson's King Kong remake, Blu-ray in 2010, and I certainly hope that someday we get a properly restored Ultra HD 4K version of this film. Not sure what the holdup is, but fingers crossed. It was my understanding the studio was considering you for the remake. They would have saved a ton of money on the ape suit.
He's got a point. You would look quite convincing climbing up the Empire State Building holding Debbie in one hand and a 12-string guitar in the other.
You know, there's one thing that this film had that really made it superior to any of the other remakes, in my opinion. In this film, Kong was a monster, and Fay Wray was terrified of the thing right until the very end. Yes, we can clearly see that Kong had an affection for Anne, but the feeling was certainly not mutual, and don't get me wrong, I love the brilliant Rick Baker makeup in the first remake, and the story and the CGI of Peter Jackson's Kong was really super fun to watch, but I just never cared for the love story. Kong, to me, always was and still is a monster. Super cool. Just this past Thursday evening in Rochester, New York, my brother Paul and my buddy John got to see this film on 35mm right there again on the big screen. Come on, how cool is that? This amazing screening took place at the EASTMAN Museum in Rochester, New York. I had a chance to briefly speak with many of the people running the event, and if there's anybody out there in the Western New York area that really cares about films, check this place out, the EASTMAN Museum. I've got a link to their website in the description. King Kong was not only an extremely influential and groundbreaking cinematic masterpiece from 1933 and still today, but has achieved legendary cult status in both cinematic history and the hearts and minds of monster lovers everywhere, paving the way for so many other great and not so great giant monkey movies in Hollywood history, like Son of Kong, King Kong vs. Godzilla, King Kong Escapes, King Kong Lives, King Kong 1976, King Kong 2005, Kong Skull Island, Godzilla vs. Kong, and so many more. We could be here all day, but that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive all about King Kong 1933, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of new videos coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig. And if you'd like to help support the channel, you can always buy us a coffee. Link in the description. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue the conversation on movies, music, and monsters. Movies.
Music and